Imagine this. A humid dawn over the Guatemalan rainforest. The air is thick with mist. Insects hum like 1,000 whispers. And beneath the tangled roots lies a secret that's been buried for over 1,000 years. For centuries, locals spoke of the jungle that devoured cities, stone temples swallowed by vines, plazas lost beneath green waves. But few believed them. Explorers came and went, drawn by the myth of El Mirador, the so-called cradle of Maya civilization. Most returned empty-handed, their maps fading with rain and time. Yet something kept calling, something deep beneath the earth. In 1920, early archaeologists stumbled upon fragments of pottery, unlike any they had ever seen. The shards bore intricate patterns, serpents, suns, and celestial symbols. They realized they weren't looking at just another Unknown. They were standing on the bones of an empire that once ruled the jungles of Central America with unmatched power and knowledge. But time is merciless. By the year 900 CE, this empire had fallen silent, entire cities abandoned, temples left half-built, thousands vanished. No war, no invasion, just disappearance. The forest swallowed everything, and for a millennium, the world forgot the Maya, until the jungle itself began to give them back. Satellite images in the early 2000s revealed geometric shapes beneath the trees, straight lines where no natural formations should exist, roads, pyramids, complex irrigation systems, hidden under centuries of soil. The discovery stunned the world. What scientists found wasn't just a single lost city. It was an entire network, a civilization stretching over 60,000 structures, connected by roads that once carried kings, warriors, and priests. They called it the Maya Superhighway, a system more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The first excavations began near Tikal and El Mirador, led by archaeologists like Dr. Richard Hansen. Beneath layers of dirt and decay, they uncovered temples rising over 200 feet tall, each aligned perfectly with the stars. It wasn't luck, it was astronomy. Science and religion fused together. But what shook the researchers most wasn't what they saw above ground. It was what they felt below it. As they cleared away debris and crept through the stone corridors, the jungle's humidity turned heavy, suffocating. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, as if even the birds refused to disturb what slept there. Some tunnels ended abruptly, sealed off by enormous slabs of limestone. Others descended deeper, into darkness. One archaeologist described it as walking into the lungs of the earth, where every breath echoed the past. Then came the carvings, dozens of them, faces of gods and kings etched into walls. But their expressions weren't triumphant. They were fearful. The once glorious Maya didn't vanish in peace. Something had terrified them enough to abandon their cities and flee into the unknown. By 2018, LiDAR scans, a form of laser mapping, revealed something even stranger. Beneath the jungle canopy, researchers detected massive underground chambers, caves that had been artificially expanded, connected by narrow tunnels, hidden for more than 1,000 years. One, in particular, drew their attention, a circular structure sealed so precisely that even water hadn't entered. It didn't match any known temple or tomb design. It was older, much older. The discovery changed everything. What began as a search for lost architecture had turned into a descent into history's shadows. Local elders warned the team not to disturb the site. They called it the House of the Sleeping One, a place that, according to oral tradition, was never meant to be opened. But curiosity is stronger than fear. In 2019, the excavation began. Each strike of the shovel peeled back another layer of time, centuries of silence, giving way to the smell of earth and decay. The deeper they went, the colder it became, though the tropical sun still blazed above. It felt unnatural, like the tomb itself was breathing. The team uncovered stairs carved directly into bedrock, leading to a circular chamber, 20 meters below. Torches flickered. Dust shimmered in the air. On the final step, a wall of perfectly fitted stones blocked their way. Then came the moment that would make headlines around the world. With a gentle push, one stone gave way, and behind it, a hollow sigh of ancient air escaped. The chamber had been sealed for more than a millennium. Inside, their flashlights revealed painted walls, deep reds, blacks, and golds that hadn't faded with time. And in the center, a stone sarcophagus resting on a raised platform. Silence fell, the kind of silence that feels alive. This was no ordinary grave. This was royal, sacred, forbidden. The team could feel it. Something about the air, thick, almost electric, made the hairs on their arms rise. The inscriptions on the walls were unlike any seen before, swirling patterns that merged human forms with gods, serpents, and celestial fire. That night, as the jungle roared outside and the campfire burned low, one archaeologist wrote in his journal, "Tomorrow, we open it, and I don't think we'll ever be the same." The jungle had finally given up one of its secrets, but what it revealed next would shake everything we thought we knew about the Maya, and about the price of uncovering the past. The moment the tomb opened, the silence of the rainforest seemed to deepen. Even the wind stopped, and in that stillness, the archaeologist realized they weren't just uncovering ruins, they were disturbing memory. Echoes of the lost empire began to rise, carried not by voices, but by the artifacts themselves. Every carving, every inscription, every broken relic whispered a story from a world that once ruled the jungles of Mesoamerica, a world that reached its height between 250 and 900 CE. The Maya were more than just a civilization. They were architects of time. They mapped the stars with frightening precision. They predicted eclipses, charted Venus, and built cities aligned perfectly with celestial events. Their pyramids weren't monuments, they were calendars written in stone. In its prime, around the year 750 CE, the Maya world stretched from modern-day Mexico through Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Dozens of city-states thrived, each ruled by its own divine king, each locked in competition, diplomacy, or war. Cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, and Copan sparkled like jewels in the jungle. Imagine standing on top of Tikal's Temple 4. As the sun rises, a sea of green stretches endlessly in every direction. The cries of howler monkeys echo through the mist. Below, the plaza teems with priests, merchants, and soldiers. For the Maya, this wasn't just a kingdom, it was the universe itself, balanced between gods above and spirits below. But what the archaeologists uncovered beneath the roots didn't speak of glory. It spoke of fear. The murals inside the tomb showed rulers kneeling before faceless gods. They weren't celebrating victory. They were begging for mercy. The inscriptions dated to the late 9th century, the twilight of Maya civilization. By that time, cities were collapsing one after another. Trade routes had dried up, famine and drought had spread. The once great cities became empty shells, their people gone, and yet, the records revealed something even more disturbing. The Maya hadn't simply disappeared, they had turned inward, into obsession, desperation, and blood. Archaeologists deciphered a phrase repeated across several carvings: "The gods demand balance." It appeared again and again, etched beside scenes of ritual offerings. To the Maya, the gods were not symbolic. They were real forces that demanded constant attention through festivals, through labor, and through sacrifice. As the droughts worsened and crops failed, rulers began ordering more sacrifices, more ceremonies, more blood, anything to appease the gods who had once blessed them. And yet the rain never came. Some historians once blamed climate change, volcanic eruptions, or warfare for the Maya collapse. But the discoveries inside the tomb suggested something far deeper, a spiritual unraveling. The faith that once united them had turned against them. One inscription near the sarcophagus mentioned a solar eclipse in 797 CE, the day the sky turned black. To the Maya, eclipses were omens of doom. The text described how, on that day, the high priests of the city gathered on temple steps, offering jade, feathers, and hearts to the gods. When the sun returned, they believed the world had been reborn, but what followed instead was disaster. A city burned, a ruler vanished, and the records stop. That gap, that sudden silence in their history, became one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Until now, when the archaeologists unearthed the tomb, they found offerings laid carefully around the sarcophagus, obsidian blades, charred incense, shells from distant shores. Each item told a story of trade, devotion, and fear. But one artifact stood out, a jade mask, perfectly preserved, its eyes hollow, its surface smooth as glass. It had been placed directly above the burial chamber, facing upward, as if watching the heavens. Some believed it represented the maize god, the deity of life and rebirth, but others felt it was a guardian, a warning. The deeper they studied, the more the evidence pointed to one conclusion. The person buried here wasn't an ordinary ruler. They were part of something far greater, a story that connected the empire's glory to its downfall. In 2020, after months of analysis, carbon dating placed the burial between 820 and 830 CE, the exact period historians mark as the beginning of the Maya collapse. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Whoever lay inside that sarcophagus lived through the final days of a dying empire. They had witnessed the unraveling of a civilization that once rivaled Egypt in its splendor and mystery, and perhaps they carried the truth of why it all ended. But as the archaeologists prepared to lift the lid, one of them hesitated. He later said, "It felt like someone or something didn't want us to." The echoes of that empire hadn't faded after all. They were waiting, and soon the world would hear them again. The vanishing of the Maya remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in human history. Imagine an empire that thrived for nearly 2,000 years, with its own writing system, complex calendars, monumental architecture, and mathematical precision that could rival modern minds. And then, within a single generation, it all disappeared. No armies marching in, no plagues sweeping across the land. Just silence. By the year 900 CE, the great cities of the classic Maya, Tikal, Copan, Palenque, Calakmul, had all fallen into ruin. Streets once filled with traders and priests became empty paths, swallowed by the jungle. The stelae, those towering stone monuments carved with royal achievements, stopped being built. The writing ceased. The rituals ended. What happened? For decades, scholars debated theories: drought, warfare, disease, political collapse, environmental exhaustion. But as the archaeologists examined the tomb and its surroundings, a chilling new narrative began to emerge. One written not by historians, but by the Maya themselves. The walls around the burial chamber were covered with murals. They weren't random. They told a story of despair, crops failing, rivers drying, people leaving their cities in endless columns. The scenes were hauntingly vivid. One figure, painted in deep red, appeared again and again, a ruler kneeling beneath a darkened sun. Next to him, hieroglyphs read, "The gods turned their faces away." It wasn't just physical collapse. It was spiritual abandonment. The Maya believed their kings were mediators between gods and people. When the heavens stopped responding, when rain refused to fall and famine spread, faith itself began to crumble. The entire social order depended on divine favor. Without it, the empire had no foundation. The tomb's inscriptions dated between 810 and 830 CE, aligning perfectly with the last recorded royal dynasties in the southern lowlands. The symbols hinted at desperate rituals, attempts to summon divine mercy through offerings and sacrifice. But there was another detail, almost hidden among the carvings: depictions of mass migrations heading north. It matched evidence found at sites like Chichen Itza and Uxmal, newer cities that rose as the southern heartlands fell. It was as if the Maya were trying to outrun their own doom, chasing hope into new land. Archaeologists found fragments of obsidian tools, jade ornaments, and pottery styles that didn't belong to one region, but many, proof of entire populations on the move. The collapse wasn't instant. It was a slow unraveling that took nearly a century, but the question that haunted everyone was why it began at all. Recent geological studies from the Yucatan Peninsula revealed massive droughts between 800 and 1000 CE, some of the worst in the region's history. Lake sediments preserved in clay layers told the same story: less rainfall, more evaporation, dying crops. The climate had turned against them. The Maya, masters of engineering, built vast reservoirs and irrigation canals to survive. But even their brilliance couldn't fight nature forever. When the rains failed, their cities, dependent on precise timing for planting and harvesting, began to starve. Famine leads to fear. Fear leads to conflict. And soon city turned on city. Inscriptions found in Pidex Batun tell of endless wars in the final century. Kings assassinated, temples burned, alliances shattered. As the people fought for survival, their gods fell silent. By 890 CE, the once mighty city of Tikal was abandoned. By 910 CE, even the great centers of the north were in decline. Yet, as the archaeologists studied the tomb, they realized something else, something far more unsettling. The murals didn't just record history, they foretold it. One scene depicted a burning city beneath a serpent in the sky, an image scholars believe represents the appearance of Halley's comet in 837 CE. To the Maya it was a sign of divine wrath, but another carving went further. It showed the ruler offering his crown to the heavens, with the words, "If the gods will not return, neither shall we." Was this prophecy or surrender? For a moment, standing in that chamber, the archaeologist felt they were looking not at ancient art, but at a final message. The moment an entire civilization realized it was doomed. Still, not everyone perished. The Maya people themselves survived. Their descendants live today across Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico. Their culture endured, their language persisted. But the empire, the vast political machine that once commanded the jungle, never rose again. What's left are fragments, ruins overtaken by roots, stelae eroded by rain, and a handful of tombs like this one, holding whispers from the end of an age. As the archaeologists prepared to descend deeper beneath the site, they found evidence of something else, something the earlier explorers had missed. A passageway sealed behind a wall of stone, leading even further underground. The instruments showed a cavity beyond it, a space large enough to hold another chamber. They believed they had found not just a tomb, but part of an entire complex. A necropolis, a city of the dead. And inside, waiting beneath centuries of darkness, was something that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about the Maya's final days. The deeper they dug, the less the jungle felt like Earth, and more like a living memory, resisting, guarding, refusing to let go. The passage behind the tomb wall was narrow, cut by human hands, long before recorded history. Its entrance was sealed with layers of limestone and clay, so perfectly aligned that not even a thread of light passed through. When the archaeologists finally broke through, a gust of cold, stale air hit their faces. It was the breath of the past. What they saw beyond would change everything. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Torches revealed walls etched with symbols, constellations, serpents, spirals, and calendars, all carved in exquisite precision. But these markings didn't match the style of the known classic Maya period. They were older, perhaps by centuries. Carbon analysis of charcoal fragments later dated the site to around 400 BCE, nearly 500 years before the great cities of Tikal or Palenque ever existed. That meant this hidden network wasn't a tomb built during the empire's fall. It was part of its beginning, a lost origin story buried beneath its own ruins. The chamber led into another, and another, each connected through narrow corridors that sloped downward like veins of stone. By the third day, the team had mapped nearly 200 meters of interconnected rooms. Pottery shards, obsidian blades, and fragments of human bone lay scattered across the floors. But what struck them most was the structure's design. It wasn't defensive or ceremonial. It was scientific. In the largest chamber, a circular pit had been carved into the ground, its edges lined with symbols of the sun, moon, and Venus. The Maya had long been known as master astronomers. But this was something else entirely. It looked like an observatory built underground, light shafts pierced through tiny openings in the ceiling, aligning with the stars at precise moments during the year. When one researcher reconstructed the pattern using digital simulation, she discovered that the shafts aligned with the morning star Venus, exactly as it appeared in the sky in 3114 BCE, the date the Maya believed time itself began. This was no coincidence. They had found a temple to creation. But among these discoveries was a detail that unsettled the team. On one wall, unlike the others, filled with elegant script, was a single carved line in large deliberate glyphs. Translated, it read, "The day we open the sky, the gods will sleep." No one could agree on its meaning. Was it myth, prophecy, a warning left for those who would come centuries later? As they pushed deeper, the air thickened, heavy with dust and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. In one narrow corridor, they found a collapsed staircase. Beneath it, a sealed stone door, carved with two intertwined serpents. In Maya culture, the double-headed serpent represented power, transformation, and the path between worlds. When they pried it open, their lights revealed a sight that made one of the younger team members step back in shock. A city, buried entirely underground. Dozens of chambers connected like streets, filled with collapsed walls, broken idols, and shrines still stained with pigment. The layout mirrored the great cities above ground, plazas, altars, temples, but smaller, tighter, claustrophobic. It wasn't meant for the living. They realized what they had found. A hidden city beneath the roots, a place where the Maya buried their gods, when the world began to fall apart. The floor was littered with fragments of jade and obsidian offerings that had never been retrieved. Some statues had their faces deliberately broken off, as if defaced in rage or fear. Others were left untouched, surrounded by burned incense and remnants of food offerings. It was as though an entire population had performed one final ritual, then sealed their sacred world away forever. At the center of this underground complex stood a platform, circular, adorned with a ring of glyphs. When translated, it spoke of a ruler who descended to speak with the ones below. Scholars identified this as a reference to the underworld, Xibalba, the realm of the dead. But something about the wording was wrong. It didn't say descended to meet the dead. It said to awaken them. The walls around the platform depicted scenes of night skies cracking open and serpents falling from the heavens. The final carving showed a woman, adorned in jade, standing between fire and stars, holding what looked like a mask. The same mask found in the tomb above. The connection was undeniable. Whoever lay in that sarcophagus was tied to this underground world, not as a victim but as a key. The archaeologists began to realize that the tomb might not have been built after the fall of the empire, but as part of a ritual meant to preserve it. What if this wasn't a city for the dead? What if it was a vault, a time capsule built to protect the Maya's greatest secrets from destruction? The more they uncovered, the stranger things became. One by one, the instruments began to fail. Batteries drained faster than expected. Lights flickered. The temperature dropped despite the tropical climate outside. Some of the crew refused to go further, but the lead archaeologist pressed on. "We've come this far," he said. "We have to see it through." At the end of the final corridor stood another sealed chamber, smaller than the rest. The door bore the same inscription as before. The day we open the sky, the gods will sleep. They marked the location, sealed it again, and retreated to the surface for the night. The jungle had reclaimed its silence, but below the roots, something ancient waited. Something the Maya had buried, not out of reverence, but out of fear. They returned at dawn. The jungle was eerily still, its usual chorus of insects and birds muted, as if the forest itself was listening. The team stood before the sealed chamber, the one marked with the haunting words, "The day we open the sky, the gods will sleep." It took 6 hours to break through. When the final stone shifted, a sound like a low sigh escaped, as if the earth was exhaling after centuries of silence. Inside, the air was heavy, ancient, filled with dust and something faintly sweet, like decayed incense. Their flashlights revealed a small circular room, no larger than 10 meters across. The walls were covered in murals, so vibrant they seemed freshly painted, reds, golds, and blacks, still alive after 1,000 years. At the center stood another sarcophagus, smaller than the first, carved from a single block of limestone. But this one was different. It wasn't resting on the ground. It was suspended by 4 stone pillars, leaving a narrow space beneath, just enough for light to pass through. On its lid, an image unlike any they had seen before. A woman kneeling, her hands raised toward a darkened sun. Around her a ring of glyphs translated to, "She who walks between life and death." The archaeologists exchanged uneasy glances. Could this be her? The same figure from the underground murals? The same queen whose mask had been found above? They decided to open it. Piece by piece they cleared the dust, documented the carvings, and finally pried the lid open. The sound echoed through the chamber, deep and hollow. Inside lay the remains of a woman no older than 30. Her bones were adorned with jade ornaments and obsidian blades arranged in perfect symmetry. Across her chest rested the same jade mask, its hollow eyes staring upward. Every Maya royal tomb had its treasures, but this one felt deliberate, ritualistic. Nothing was random. Every object was placed as if part of a code. Among the offerings was something completely unexpected. A small clay tablet inscribed with glyphs that seemed to differ from the known Maya script. Linguists would later confirm that it used a hybrid language, part Maya, part something older, possibly Olmec. Its translation sent shivers down the spine of every scholar who read it. It said, "The world ends when the sky forgets its children." At first they thought it was poetry, a symbolic warning, but as they studied further, they found references to celestial alignments, solar cycles, and eclipses that precisely matched astronomical records between 800 and 830 CE, the very years the Maya civilization began to collapse. It was as if this woman, whoever she was, had known what was coming. Who was she? Analysis of her bones revealed traces of cinnabar, a red mercury-based pigment reserved only for the highest nobility. Her skull bore slight modifications, a practice used among Maya elites to signify divine lineage. Everything pointed to one conclusion: she was royalty, but which queen? Inscriptions on the walls of the chamber spoke of a ruler called Ixkabel, known from stelae found in the city of El Perro, Waka. She reigned around 700 CE, known as the Kalumtei, or Supreme Warrior Queen. But the dates didn't match. This burial was at least a century later. Another name appeared in the glyphs, one previously unknown to history: Ixtizul, the one who calls the sky. No record of her existed anywhere else. It was as though she'd been erased from the historical record. And yet, her presence here, buried beneath the oldest levels of Maya civilization, suggested she was no ordinary monarch. She was part of something sacred, something forbidden. The murals surrounding her tomb told fragments of her story. They showed a time of drought and fear. The gods, once generous, had turned silent. The people begged for signs, and none came. Then a woman, crowned in jade, stood before the priests and declared she would speak to the gods herself. According to the imagery, she performed a ritual that lasted 13 nights. On the final night, a black sun rose, a total solar eclipse, dated to 827 CE. The next day, the rains returned, but the cost was immense. The murals showed her lying in a pool of crimson, her heart lifted to the heavens. The glyphs below read, "Her blood became the bridge." The implication was horrifying. She had offered herself as the ultimate sacrifice to restore balance between gods and men. And for a moment, it had worked. But what terrified the archaeologist wasn't her death. It was what came after. In the outer ring of the mural, new scenes appeared: temples burning, people fleeing, stars falling from the sky. The inscription beneath read, "And when the gods awoke, they were no longer ours." It was as though her act of sacrifice had opened something that could never be closed again. The team's lead epigrapher, a veteran of dozens of Maya sites, said quietly, "This isn't mythology, it's a confession." They realized they were looking at the record of a civilization's greatest act of desperation. A queen who tried to save her world, and may have doomed it instead. News of the discovery spread fast. Newspapers around the world called it the tomb that changed everything, not just because it revealed a forgotten ruler, but because it hinted that the Maya collapse might not have been purely natural or political. It might have been self-inflicted, through faith, through ritual, through the opening of something they didn't understand. And yet, even as the archaeologists packed up their notes, one thing remained unspoken among them. No one could explain why the murals, after more than 1,000 years underground, still glistened as though freshly painted. The colors shimmered faintly under the light, as if alive, and when they left that chamber, a local worker swore he heard something faint echo from below. A sound, like whispering. They said it started with the whisper. At first, no one paid attention. A faint rustle in the night, like wind slipping through cracks in stone. But soon, it became something else, a low murmur, rhythmic, almost human. The guards stationed near the excavation site swore they heard it coming from the tomb itself. One said, it sounded like chanting. Another described it as crying. And yet every time they searched, the chamber was silent. It began to unnerve the team. Archaeologists pride themselves on logic, on carbon dating, stratigraphy, science. But even they couldn't ignore what was happening. Equipment malfunctioned inside the tomb. Batteries drained within minutes. The temperature dropped, despite the jungle's heat. One night, their lead technician woke up screaming, his clothes soaked through with sweat. He said he dreamt of a woman in jade, standing in a tunnel of stars, whispering, "The bridge is broken." The team brushed it off as stress, but the locals didn't. Elder villagers from nearby communities came forward with stories, ones their grandparents had passed down. They spoke of the sleeping queen, the one who had bargained with the gods to save the crops and who would awaken when the sky turned black again. They warned the foreigners not to disturb her rest. But the work continued. By late 2024, the tomb's contents were transported to the National Museum in Guatemala City for preservation. Among the artifacts was the mysterious hybrid tablet, the one that mentioned the sky forgetting its children. That's when the real fear began. When scanned under spectral light, the tablet revealed layers of glyphs invisible to the naked eye, like someone had written over older text. The older writing didn't match any known Maya dialect. It referenced a place called Bacanal Chin, the Cave of Rebirth. According to surviving myths, this was no ordinary cave. It was believed to be one of the entrances to Asabelba, the Maya underworld, the same realm where souls were tested, tortured, and reborn. The same place the gods of death ruled. It was then that the realization hit them. The tomb wasn't just a burial. It was a gateway. Archaeologist Ene Valdez, one of the few who still dared to descend into the tunnels, described it in her notes. The walls hum, at night, not in sound, but in pressure, like something on the other side is waiting. She wasn't exaggerating. Infrared imaging later revealed that beneath the queen's chamber lay a second cavity, carved directly into the bedrock. Its shape was unnaturally perfect, a circle within a circle, the same design seen in ancient Maya depictions of cosmic portals. When they drilled a tiny borehole to send a micro camera down, what they saw made the team go silent. It wasn't empty. The chamber was lined with rows of human skulls, hundreds of them, arranged in spirals, leading toward a pit in the center. And in that pit, something gleamed. At first, they thought it was gold, but under magnification, it reflected light too sharply. It was obsidian, black, flawless, and carved into the shape of an eye. The Eye of Zabalbal. Local mythology spoke of it as an object that allowed the living to see the world of the dead, but it was never supposed to exist in reality. Yet here it was. After that discovery, everything changed. Members of the team began to fall ill. Some developed fevers that no medicine could explain. Others left the project entirely too shaken to continue. In her final report, Valdez wrote something chilling. The deeper we go, the more the site changes. It's like the earth is rebuilding itself around the tomb. The Guatemalan Institute of Anthropology ordered a temporary suspension of the dig. But by then word had already spread, and not everyone wanted the tomb to remain closed. Private collectors, pseudo-archaeologists, and even spiritual cults began to circle the site. They claimed the tomb was proof that the Maya had discovered the secret of life and death, that the gods of Zabalba were real, waiting to be awakened. But what none of them understood was what the archaeologists feared most. It wasn't the curses, it wasn't the superstitions, it was the pattern. Because when Valdez's team compared the glyphs from the tomb with other Maya ruins, from Tikal, Palenque, and Calakmul, they noticed something impossible. Each of those sites contained fragments of the same prophecy. Each described a queen who would open the sky. Each warned of a cycle, one that repeats every 1,312 years. The last cycle ended around 827 CE. Add 1,312 years, you get 2139. But the glyphs on the hidden layer of the tablet suggested something even more alarming. They hinted that the countdown began not from the queen's death, but from the moment her tomb was opened. And that happened in 2023. That's why the team stopped speaking publicly. That's why the government quietly sealed off access to the site. Because if the translation was correct, something began the moment they broke that seal. Something the Maya had died trying to contain. The decision to go back down was not taken lightly. Months had passed since the site was sealed. The official story was structural instability. But behind closed doors, the truth was more complex. The data they'd gathered from the lower chamber didn't make sense. Magnetic anomalies, unexplainable seismic readings, temperature fluctuations that pulsed like a heartbeat. Something down there was moving. In July 2025, under the guise of a final inspection, a smaller team returned. No cameras, no journalists, just 6 people. Among them was Dr. Ana Valdez, the same woman who had sworn she'd never step foot in that jungle again. Her journal begins with one line: "We shouldn't have come back." The tomb had changed. Where once there had been vines and soil, now the entrance was strangely clean, as if freshly carved. The symbols on the lintel, those ancient warnings, appeared sharper, as though re-etched by unseen hands. As they descended, the air thickened. Even the seasoned archaeologists struggled to breathe. Every sound, footsteps, whispers, tools, scraping stone, seemed amplified, and somewhere below, the same low hum resonated again. When they reached the queen's chamber, everything was exactly as they'd left it, except for one thing. The jade mask was gone. The sarcophagus lay open, empty. There was no sign of forced entry, no disturbance of dust or debris. It was as if the body and mask had simply vanished. The team froze. For several minutes, no one spoke. Then Valdez noticed something even stranger. The murals on the wall were different. Scenes that had once shown temples and sacrifices were now shifting towards something darker. New figures had appeared, people kneeling before a rising black sun, hands covering their faces. Above them, the queen's image had changed. Her head was tilted upward now, her eyes open, her mouth curved in a faint smile, as if she'd awakened. Panic rippled through the group. One of the assistants, a young linguist named Rafael Ortiz, began recording the new glyphs, trying to prove they were hallucinating. But the footage came out blank. His camera captured only static and flickers of red light. Still, they pressed deeper. The team's focus was the lower chamber, the circular pit lined with skulls. They set up equipment to measure radiation and sound. At first, everything was quiet, but as they approached the obsidian eye, a vibration began to ripple through the floor. Not loud, just enough to feel it in their bones. Raphael moved closer, shining his flashlight into the center of the spiral. That's when they saw it, faint wisps rising from between the skulls, like smoke or mist. But it wasn't smoke. It moved deliberately, curling toward them, forming patterns in the air. Valdez shouted for everyone to step back. The instruments spiked, magnetic fields surging to impossible levels. The air temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Every light flickered out. Darkness. Then for a single heartbeat, they saw something. Not a shape, not a person, but a shimmer, like heat distortion, rippling through the air. And within that distortion, the faint outline of the queen's face. Her jade eyes glowed faintly, unblinking, and then silence. When the lights returned, Raphael was gone. His equipment lay where he had stood, the ground scorched in a perfect circle. The rest of the team fled. By dawn, the Guatemalan authorities had arrived. The site was officially closed under national security protocols. The surviving members of the team were taken for debriefing. None of them ever worked in the field again. In her final entry before disappearing from public life, Valdez wrote, "We woke her. Not the woman, the voice behind her." Satellite scans conducted months later revealed that the ground beneath the tomb had shifted again. The lower chamber no longer appeared in the imaging data, as if it had sealed itself. But new voids had appeared deeper still, spreading outward like veins through the bedrock. Some say the forest has grown thicker since then. Locals claim to hear humming at night, the same sound that haunted the first team. Others report strange lights flickering among the trees, pale green, like jade catching the moonlight. The government has walled off the entire region. Officially, it's due to conservation, but villagers whisper that no animals enter that area anymore. Birds refuse to fly over it, and when the wind is right, you can still hear it, a whisper under the canopy. The bridge is open. That's what they fear now, that the Maya weren't warning about the end of their world. They were warning about ours. It started with a pattern. Across Central America, from Belize to Honduras, archaeologists began reporting strange anomalies in sites that hadn't been touched in decades. Sensors malfunctioned, drones lost signal mid-flight, and in the soil new glyphs, ones no one remembered carving, began to appear on exposed stones, almost identical to those found in the lost queen's tomb. At first they dismissed it as coincidence, erosion, misinterpretation, but then something undeniable happened. In early 2026, during the spring equinox, the Temple of the Masks in Lamanai caught the first rays of sunrise, and for the first time in centuries, its carvings glowed. Not reflected. Glowed. The phenomenon lasted 7 minutes. Enough time for cameras to capture the faint image of a woman's face emerging in light. The same features found on the jade mask. That image spread online within hours. People called it a hoax. Others called it a sign. But for those who'd worked at the Queen's tomb, it was confirmation of their greatest fear. The prophecy was unfolding. Ancient Maya texts had long spoken of the 13th sky, a time when the balance between worlds would collapse, when the dead would whisper through the living, and the gods would reclaim what was theirs. Most scholars dismissed it as allegory, mythic storytelling meant to explain the civilization's decline. But every new finding seemed to rewrite that assumption. Ana Valdez had vanished after the Forbidden Chamber incident, but fragments of her research began surfacing online through anonymous leaks. One of her private notes, dated September 2025, contained a single sentence: "The Queen didn't die for her people, she died to open the way." She believed the entire Maya collapse was not due to drought or war, but because of a deliberate spiritual experiment, an attempt to pierce the veil between life and death. A ritual gone wrong that fractured time itself. And the chilling part, according to her calculations based on solar cycles and eclipse records, the veil weakens every 1,312 years, exactly when the next cycle of the prophecy begins. The year her tomb was opened, it was all aligning. The Maya believed time was circular, not linear, not progressive, but an eternal wheel, spinning through repeating ages called Baktuns. Each Baktun carried its own destiny, and in their calendar the 13th Baktun was always the final one, the age of transformation and judgment. Historians had laughed at doomsday interpretations of 2012. When the 13th Baktun ended, they said it was symbolic. But what if the prophecy didn't end? What if it restarted? And what if her awakening marked the beginning of something far larger? Researchers who had handled artifacts from the tomb began to report nightmares. The same dream, shared by people thousands of miles apart, a staircase descending into darkness. A woman in jade at the bottom, whispering words they couldn't understand. Some even claimed they began to speak fragments of an unknown language in their sleep. Psychologists called it mass suggestion. But one thing defied explanation. The dreams always came at the same time. 3:12 a.m. The numbers, the cycle, everything pointed back to her. Meanwhile, in Guatemala's Petén region, satellite thermal imaging revealed faint geometric outlines, buried beneath the jungle, enormous circular structures, aligned perfectly with ancient constellations. These were not random. They were spread across hundreds of kilometers, forming what looked like a map centered on the Queen's tomb. When connected, the lines formed the shape of an eye, the same obsidian eye found in the lower chamber. The government tried to keep the findings classified, but a group of independent researchers leaked the data. Their conclusion was chilling. The Maya hadn't built cities at random. They had built a ritual machine, a vast network of temples designed to resonate with the stars. And the Queen's sacrifice had been the key that powered it. Now that the tomb was open, that resonance had started again. Seismographs across Central America picked up low-frequency tremors that didn't match tectonic activity. The vibrations pulsed at regular intervals, almost like a heartbeat. The locals began calling it el latido de la tierra, the heartbeat of the earth. No one could trace its source, no volcano, no machinery. Just a steady pulse that grew stronger each week. And then something stranger still. During one of these tremors, researchers at Tikal recorded faint sounds echoing from deep underground. When the audio was cleaned and slowed, it revealed what sounded like chanting, thousands of voices repeating the same phrase in ancient Maya, Chaya Tucax. The bridge is open. It was the same phrase Valdez had written in her last message. Coincidence, maybe. But what if it wasn't? If the prophecy was real, if the cycle had begun again, then the Queen's tomb wasn't a discovery. It was a doorway. And what lay beyond was waking up. Her name had been erased from history, but not forgotten by the earth. Ixtizol, the Queen who would not die. For centuries, she was dismissed as myth. No record in any known stela, no mention in royal bloodlines. It was as though the Maya themselves had tried to erase her. But myths have a way of surviving when truth is too dangerous to tell. When Valdez uncovered the hybrid glyphs in 2023, one symbol appeared again and again, a serpent biting its own tail. The Maya called it Irachen, the loop of return. To them, death wasn't an ending. It was rotation, continuation, a door that always opens if you know where to knock. Ixtazul was that door. The murals inside her tomb had told only fragments, but pieced together with discoveries from Palenque, Tikal and Waka, a clearer picture began to emerge, one that painted her not as a victim, but as an architect of something vast. She had ruled during chaos. The droughts of the 820s had decimated crops, fractured city-states, and sent entire populations fleeing into the forests. Priests begged for divine intervention. Kings sacrificed captives by the hundreds. Yet the sky remained dry, the gods silent. And then she appeared, a young queen who claimed she had heard the gods in her dreams. They called her the daughter of the black sun. She promised she could open the sky and restore balance, but the price would be beyond comprehension. Some resisted her, others worshipped her as divine. Within months, she consolidated power through war, uniting scattered Maya cities under one banner. And in the final year of her reign, she built the Great Chamber, the one now buried beneath the jungle. The ritual she led was unlike anything ever recorded. According to newly translated glyphs found in 2025, the ceremony involved 13 priests, 7 virgins, and 1 chosen queen. The offerings included jade, obsidian, and living blood, enough to fill a river. At the center of it all, a mirror made from volcanic glass, polished so perfectly it reflected not faces, but stars. They called it the Eye of Xibalba. The purpose, to pierce the barrier between the realms, to summon the gods who had abandoned them, to bring life back to a dying world. But something went wrong. In the murals, after the bloodletting, the stars fall, the temples burn, people cover their eyes, the queen kneels before the black sun, and disappears. Her body was never found, only the mask remained. Until the day the archaeologists unearthed her tomb. And now, all over the Yucatan, strange phenomena began to echo the ancient story. Temples long dormant were stirring. In Copan, seismic vibrations mirrored the rhythm of ancient Maya drum patterns. In Calakmul, statues of gods that had crumbled centuries ago were found standing upright after storms. Satellite scans revealed that underground water tables once stagnant were shifting in patterns matching the Maya calendar wheel. It was as though the earth itself was breathing again, exhaling something long buried. The Maya had a word for this, Kuhul Chulel, the returning spirit, and the priests had warned, when the Chulel rises again, the queen will walk, and the sky will fall. Some scholars now believe that Ixtixil never intended to die. Her sacrifice wasn't surrender. It was ascension, a merging of blood and divinity, locking her consciousness into the Eye of Xibalba. She didn't open the bridge once, she became it. That's why her tomb reacted the way it did when disturbed. The murals changing, the humming beneath the earth, the voices. It wasn't the wrath of a god, it was a signal. When the archaeologists broke the seal, they didn't just find her, they completed her ritual. One of the surviving members of Valdez's team, now living under a false identity, later told a journalist, "She wanted us to find her. Everything was waiting for that moment." The tomb was built to be discovered, but only when the sky returned to her alignment. And that alignment happened in April 2023. The same month her chamber was opened. Solar records confirmed a rare phenomenon that year, a hybrid eclipse visible over Central America, one that hadn't occurred in that region since 827 CE, exactly 1,196 years apart. The same year the murals said she died. It was as if the heavens had marked her resurrection. After that, reports of sightings spread. Farmers near Flores claimed to have seen a woman in green robes walking at dusk, her eyes like polished jade. At first people thought it was hysteria, but too many accounts matched, too many voices describing the same figure, moving silently between ruins, always at twilight, always vanishing into the jungle. The Maya had a name for that time of day, Kinam Tsul, the hour of the crossing. For them, dusk was sacred, the moment when the world of men and the world of spirits overlapped. So perhaps in that golden hour, the queen walks again, not as flesh, but as memory given form. And if the old prophecies are true, her return is not the end. It's the beginning of the 13th sky, the age when the bridge between worlds no longer closes. The question now isn't who Ixtizol was, it's what she's becoming. Imagine this, the year is 2027, the air above the Yucatan Peninsula hums with tension. The world doesn't know it yet, but the cycle has begun to move again quietly, invisibly, like a heartbeat beneath the surface of history. It started with the sky. In March, astronomers recorded a faint atmospheric disturbance stretching across Central America, a ripple of ionized particles with no identifiable source. It wasn't from solar flares, or satellites, or auroras. It came from the ground. And in the small Guatemalan town nearest to the sealed excavation site, locals began to notice something uncanny. Shadows no longer fell the same way. The sun dimmed earlier each evening, the sky bruising into violet long before dusk. Birds circled in restless loops, refusing to land. They called it the black light. By late April the phenomenon spread. Satellite feeds glitched out for minutes at a time when passing over the region. Magnetic compasses spun in erratic bursts. Deep below, sensors from geological surveys recorded faint pulses at exact 13-minute intervals. 13, the number of heavens in the Maya cosmos. 13, the number of steps in the ladder to Zabalbaba. 13, the number carved above the queen's sarcophagus. The connection was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, researchers trying to decode Valdez's final notes began to see a pattern. The eye of Xibalba wasn't just symbolic. It was a map of energy points buried across the Yucatan, all calibrated to celestial alignments. In other words, it was a machine built from temples, caves, and rivers, using the planet's own magnetic field as fuel. And it had been dormant until they opened her tomb. By June, unexplainable atmospheric events multiplied. Over Tikal, a total solar eclipse darkened the city. In midday, an event no astronomer had predicted. For 45 seconds, day turned to night. And when the light returned, witnesses claimed the temple of the Great Jaguar shimmered, as if glowing from within. It wasn't just Guatemala. In Mexico, at Palenque, seismic sensors recorded a deep, rhythmic vibration beneath the Temple of Inscriptions, the resting place of King Pakal. Some scientists dismissed it as aftershock. Others noticed the tremor matched the same frequency pattern first detected beneath the queen's tomb. It was as if something ancient, buried deep in the earth, was slowly awakening. But then came the moment that made headlines. August 12, 2027, the anniversary of the Maya creation date, the beginning of their long count calendar. At exactly midnight, a black eclipse covered the moon, and for 7 minutes, the sky above the Yucatan turned completely dark, darker than night, as if light itself had been swallowed. Radio signals cut out, GPS failed. In those minutes of silence, a low vibration rolled across the land. People described it as the sound of 1,000 drums beneath the ground. And then a flash, across the region. Every major Maya ruin, from Copan to Chichen Itza, emitted a short burst of infrared light. It was invisible to the naked eye, but satellites caught it. 12 points of light, all pulsing toward a 13th, the Queen's tomb. The world's media called it a geological coincidence, but those who knew the truth called it what it was, the 13th sky rising. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen to those who had handled artifacts from the excavation. One researcher claimed she began hearing a woman's voice while studying the jade mask under containment. It whispered in ancient Maya, Chan Ku, worship the gods. Another man vanished, leaving behind only his field journal. The last entry read, "The sun has turned its face away. She's calling us back." No one ever saw him again. And yet the story was not just about fear. There was a deeper question, one Valdez had asked in her final lecture before disappearing. What if the Maya didn't fail? What if they succeeded in something we still can't comprehend? The droughts, the wars, the collapse. Perhaps they weren't endings, but choices, sacrifices to preserve something beyond their time. The prophecy never said the 13th sky would bring destruction. It said it would bring balance. Maybe the bridge between worlds wasn't meant to destroy us. Maybe it was meant to wake us up. But balance demands both light and shadow. And as the sky darkened again that summer, as the hum beneath the earth grew stronger, one thing became clear. The Queen's promise was fulfilled. She had opened the sky. And now, the world waited to see what would step through. It began quietly, 2 months after the eclipse, when the sky over Central America still seemed to pulse faintly. At night, archaeologists started disappearing, not vanishing into myth or rumor, simply gone, leaving behind tents, notebooks and half-eaten meals. The first was Dr. Alejandro Ruiz, a young epigrapher stationed near Copan, Honduras. He'd been working late, translating a series of carved stelae discovered just weeks earlier. His radio check came at 11:07 p.m. His voice was calm, focused. At dawn his tent was empty. His laptop was open. The last line typed on his screen read, "The tombs speak when the stars align." They found no footprints, no struggle, only a faint layer of ash on the stone slab where he'd been working, as if something had burned from the inside out. At first his disappearance was kept quiet. The Institute for Mesoamerican Studies didn't want panic. They called it field fatigue, a common excuse. But within days, 2 more researchers, both members of the Valdez team, went missing. One in Belize, one in Mexico. In both cases, the same strange residue was found. Ash, fine, almost magnetic. And in both cases, security cameras flickered for exactly 13 seconds before the timestamp jumped forward. 13 seconds gone. 13 names soon to follow. Because it didn't stop there. Over the next month, more went missing. Linguists, historians, even a documentary film crew. They were the ones who had been closest to the artifacts. The ones who had touched the sarcophagus, read the glyphs aloud, or studied the Queen's mask under UV light. And each time, the same pattern repeated. Electrical interference. A faint vibration. Silence. Local villagers began whispering about the chosen return. They said the Queen's spirit was reclaiming those who disturbed her rest. Not in vengeance, but in duty, to guide her army back. The governments of Guatemala and Mexico locked down excavation zones. Drones were banned. Researchers were recalled, but a few refused to leave. Among them was Dr. Sofia Martinez, the last surviving member of the original Valdez expedition. In an interview recorded just before communication was lost, she said something chilling. "The tombs aren't empty. They were never meant to be. We thought we were unearthing history, but history was unearthing us." That was September 18th, 2027. Her signal went dead 47 hours later. Her camera was recovered 2 weeks after the lockdown. The footage was mostly static, but near the end, as lightning struck the canopy above, a face appeared for less than a second. Not hers, not human, eyes of jade, skin of obsidian, teeth carved like the sun. Experts dismissed it as artifact distortion. But those who watched it live said they heard something else layered in the static. A voice repeating the same phrase in ancient Maya. "We never died." That same night, all seismic activity beneath the Yucatan ceased. The magnetic anomalies stopped. The air grew still, as if something had finally completed its purpose. When investigators entered the sealed tomb weeks later, they found new carvings on the chamber walls. Fresh, not ancient. The symbols matched, none known to epigraphers, but one stood out. A perfect circle surrounded by 13 smaller ones. The Eye of Xibalba. But this time, it wasn't carved in stone. It was burned into it. The scientific community refused to release the footage. Officially, the disappearances remain under investigation. Unofficially, the entire region has been declared a restricted heritage zone. No drones, no tourists, no excavation. The jungle has reclaimed everything. The tombs are sealed again, hidden beneath roots and vines. And yet at night, from miles away, locals say you can still see faint lights rising from the trees. Soft greenish orbs drifting upward like souls breaking free. Some believe it's swamp gas. Others, the spirits of the fallen. But the elders have another explanation. They say the archaeologists didn't vanish. They ascended. They became part of the 13th sky, guardians of the bridge between worlds. And in a way, that's what history always does. It consumes those who chase it too far. Type next to continue with the final section, Legacy of the 13th Sky. You said next. ChatGPT said, the story doesn't end in the jungle. It lives in the air we breathe. The silence before a storm. The glint of gold buried under the roots of forgotten trees. Because history, true history, never dies. It waits. After the disappearances, the world tried to move on. By early 2028, the excavation sites were declared off-limits. The government sealed the tunnels, filled in entrances, and covered the tombs with concrete. Officially, they said it was for preservation. Unofficially, they were afraid. Satellite imaging showed residual energy patterns across the entire Yucatan Peninsula. Not random, geometric. The same pattern found on the Queen's mask, etched like a code of light. Each point pulsed at 13-minute intervals, as if marking time. Something was counting. But even beyond that, the legacy of the Maya began to reappear in unexpected ways. Farmers reported dreams of serpents coiling around stone altars. Children born during the eclipse showed rare chromatic patterns in their irises, flecks of gold and green like jade dust. And across museums worldwide, Maya artifacts began emitting faint electromagnetic fields detectable only under precise conditions. Coincidence? Or the continuation of something ancient? In 2029, a small team of researchers, operating independently, discovered a curious correlation between the magnetic pulses in the Yucatan and global seismic activity. The pulses seemed to anticipate tectonic shifts by hours, as if the Earth itself was responding to the 13th sky. They began to wonder, had the Maya, in their understanding of cosmic cycles, tapped into something the modern world had forgotten, a rhythm that connected the heavens, the earth, and the human spirit? The answer might lie not in fear, but in awakening, because for all the dread that surrounded the Queen's tomb, there was also a strange harmony. The droughts, the wars, the sacrifices, they all fit within the Maya belief that destruction and renewal were inseparable. To them, endings were beginnings. Maybe the 13th sky wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a warning. To remember, to respect what came before, to stop treating the past as something buried, and start seeing it as something living. One final detail surfaced in 2030, when a forgotten field recording from Dr. Valdez's last day in the tomb was decrypted. Her voice was calm, trembling with awe. She said, they wanted to be remembered not as gods, but as keepers of time. They built the tombs as mirrors, to show us who we were before we forgot. Then silence, followed by a whisper barely audible beneath static. When the 13th sky rises again, remember we never left. That recording was never released publicly, but those who heard it said it changed something in them. They stopped fearing the dark. They started listening. And maybe that's the real legacy of the 13th sky. Not the disappearances, not the fear, but the reminder that some stories don't belong to the past. They're still unfolding, quietly, around us. Every civilization leaves behind echo. Most fade, but some, like the Maya, leave behind a living memory, a pulse in the stone, a hum beneath the ground, a whisper in the wind. And if you ever stand in the jungles of the Yucatan at night, when the air is still and the moon hangs low, you might feel it too, the vibration beneath your feet, the breath of the ancient world exhaling once more. Maybe it's just the earth settling, or maybe it's the 13th sky, opening again, and somewhere, in the darkness, a voice says softly, "Welcome back." Before you scroll away, think about this. For centuries, the Maya warned that when the 13th sky opened, humanity would face a choice to destroy or to remember. Maybe that time isn't coming. Maybe it's already here. So don't let this story fade into the noise of the internet. Keep history alive, share it, talk about it, question it. Because every mystery we uncover brings us one step closer to understanding who we really are and what we've forgotten. If this journey through the lost tombs of the Maya made you feel something, that chill, that wonder, that spark, then don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell so you never miss the next hidden chapter of our world's forbidden past. Because the deeper we dig, the more we realize the past isn't dead. It's waiting for us to listen. This is your moment to keep the story alive. Stay curious, stay fearless, and remember, the 13th sky has only just begun to open.